I have so much respect for the work that Michelle and I have do on a daily basis. It is challenging to be in the higher education space because this is a space that is radically changing. And it's radically changing in what I think is the most authentic and best way, from the ground up. When I became a college president 12 years ago, all anyone wanted to talk about was the elite schools, right? And looked for leadership and change from the elite schools. And I remember pointing out to people back then that in the history of mankind, revolutions never started from above, right? What do the people who rule have to revolt against, right? We don't have enough spoils? Like, that's not how it works. Revolutions start from below. They start from small, disaffected groups of people who look around and say, I've had it. I have had it. I want something different. And then they start to create something different. So during the time that we are together now, and I'm going to come over here because I don't want you all to feel like you have no friends, okay? And first of all, let me just say to all my scaling partner friends, it is wonderful to see you guys. You know, this is a wonderful, those of you who don't know, we're part of a Gates group. We meet 2, 3, 15 times a year, is it? We meet a lot. We're discussing how you scale changes in higher education. What we've really done is made great friends, all right? So it's wonderful to see you guys. But my point is, in this era, change comes similarly to the way it's come throughout history, which is small groups of people who are unhappy make noise, and then they make a movement, and then things change for all of us. That's how it works. So today, for the time that we're together, we're going to talk about change. Or the way that we frame it at Paul Quinn College, we call it a revolution. Because when we started, we had no friends. Right? No, this is a true story. We had no friends. In fact, the friends we had jettisoned us, right? We were kicked out of all the organizations that we were a part of. People tried to take away our accreditation. I mean, it was bad. My first 2 years of being a college president, we lost 80% of our enrollment. Okay, which, by the way, not the way you want to start your career. Okay, not at all. So for the time we're together today, I want to talk about Paul Quinn College, but I really want to talk about us, right? And us is the higher education community and what we are capable of and what this country needs us to be capable of. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the revolution. This is my favorite quote. And one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? By Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, lots of people love the I Have a Dream version of Dr. King. I actually love the poor people's campaign version of Dr. King, because that was Dr. King who looked around and said, I thought I fought the right war, but I fought a battle in a war that was much bigger than what I saw, and then changed to fight the real fight, which is addressing poverty. 40 million Americans live in poverty in the richest country in the world. The only reason that exists is because we allow it to exist. And if we want to change it, then all of us have to dedicate ourselves to changing it. And that's what we talk about every day at Paul Quinn College. We believe America is at war against its future. This is a real picture. This is a real picture of how some people in our country live. I could tell you that it's partially a real picture of the way some of my students live. And I know that because I've been to their homes. Right? I'm not one of those college presidents that sits in my office and writes papers and goes to conferences, although I do go to this conference. But it's summertime. My students aren't here right now. Right? But my point is, I know the lives my students lead because I've helped recruit them. I've been to their high schools. I've walked the streets of their neighborhood, because I don't know how you're supposed to lead people that you don't know. Right? I mean, is it the theory of leadership? I mean, I went back and got a doctorate as a sitting college president, in part because I realized that I was president of a college where the only thing I shared in common with my students was that the majority of them were black, right? I grew up in a very upper middle class, affluent life. I got 3 degrees in 10 years. I worked because that's what you needed to do to build your resume. But I was charged with taking care of students who come from Pell Grant backgrounds, who come from some of the most difficult places in this country. And I had a theory of what their lives were like, but I didn't understand what it meant to work full-time, go to school full-time, have a family. That is hard, right? And we were asking the wrong questions. The question we should have been asking is, why do we force people to go to school that way? Why do we think that's okay? But I would not have known that until, frankly, I was stressed out all the time. I felt as if I was doing a horrible job being a college president. I felt as if I was doing a horrible job being a husband. I felt like I was doing a horrible job being a parent, which is kind of ironic when I won Father of the Year, because I thought I was sucking it up as a dad, right? So the point is, you have to be able to walk in people's shoes, but first you have to know their shoes, right? This is too much of our reality in this country. So our students are poor. Do you know that the majority of students in public K through 12 education in this country live in low-income backgrounds and families? If you look at the map, the entire southern portion of our country, students are living in deep poverty and going to school. This means that those students are on free and reduced lunch plans, right? It means that if they aren't in school, they might not eat a balanced meal. How can we be okay with that? Right? How can we look at this map and feel anything other than anger that we've allowed this to be our reality? So our students are poor. Our students are unprepared. Only 46% of SAT takers in 2017 met the benchmark score for college readiness. Only 31% of Latino test takers met that mark. Only 20% of African American test takers met that mark. So our students are poor, they're unprepared for college, and our graduates apparently don't get any better after they complete college. So 79% of all employers want their entry-level hires to come to them with real-world work experience for entry-level jobs. Where are you supposed to get experience for entry-level jobs if you're entering the jobs when you come from college? Well, it turns out college students wish that colleges had helped them get real-world work experience. 50% of college students want that. So let's think about this for a moment. Your customer as a institution of higher education happens to be employers. And it also happens to be your students. I know some people get offended by the idea of calling the relationship a customer relationship. The students pay us. They're our customers, right? Our employer partners are unhappy. Our students are unhappy. The only people happy with this arrangement happens to be higher ed. This is a bad business model. This is why people are so angry at us. They have told us what they want, and we have not listened. You all act like this is okay, right? If my wife told me what she wanted and I continually didn't listen, okay, are you all married? Like, do you, right? This is a hard crowd. Let me just help you out for a little bit. You will not be married if that's your business model, okay? All right. So, colleges are too expensive. 70% of college graduates have significant debt. 44 million Americans have debt that totals $1.5 trillion. The average student loan debt in 2018 was $37,000. We have to be able to do better than that. It's hard to believe that we as a country aren't at war against our future when these are our numbers. So here's the thing, the cavalry isn't coming. Well, this made a lot more sense before this weekend when Robert Smith just decided to play Daddy Warbucks, right? But the point with this is this. Billionaires, and this is just 2017, billionaires made so much money that they could have ended extreme poverty 7 times over. And yet extreme poverty still exists. Now, we're not talking about they had to give all their money away. All they had to do was just give 2017's earnings away, and extreme poverty would have been ended. And yet, poverty still exists. So we go back to the Dr. Martin Luther King quote. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, why are there 40 million people living in poverty when we could fix it? But if the people who have the financial resources choose not to address this issue, then maybe it's incumbent upon the rest of us to do so. So, welcome to Paul Quinn College and the Quinnite Nation. This is Jasmine Norman. She is an amazing student at our college. She was number 2 in her high school class in Memphis, Frederick Douglass High School. And about every other year, we invite a group in from Dear World, and they do this exercise where you write down messages on your body that you want people to know about you. She wants everyone to know that she's a rose that grew from concrete. Now, you all missed the whole marriage thing, so I'm guessing this is not a Tupac crowd either, right? So for those of you who don't know Tupac, he was a rhythmic American poet, okay? He wrote poetry that sometimes vacillated between rage and just jamming party tunes, okay? But he wrote this amazing book of poetry that talked about roses that grow from concrete. At Paul Quinn College, we exist, schools like ours exist, because we understand that roses do grow from concrete. They just shouldn't have to, right? They just shouldn't have to. We also understand this about roses. Every rose does not bloom on the first day of spring, but it doesn't mean that that rose won't be brilliant. Jasmine Norman is a brilliant rose who grew from concrete. And what she's telling you is she's owning her story. She's telling it to you herself. So one of the things that we believe at Paul Quinn College is we think that institutions of higher education should turn themselves outward and address the needs of the day. At Paul Quinn College, 85% of our students annually are on Pell Grants. 70% of those students have 0 expected family contributions. 40% of our students come from outside the state of Texas. 23% of our students are Latino. And people are always surprised about how many Latino students we have. 2 things about that. One, we are in Texas. Right? And for those of you who might have gone to high school in Texas where they don't teach real American history, you will catch that later, okay? All right? Texas was Mexico, okay? So the only way we wind up without a significant number of Latino students if we just tell Latino students you can't come to school here. And we would never do that. I used to tell this joke that HBCU stood for Hispanic, Black, and Caucasian University. Told the joke to a group of people who didn't appreciate it. The only reason I got out alive is because I was bigger and faster than they were, all right? But my point is, we are institutions that have always welcomed everyone, all right? The only way you could have schools back at the end of slavery was you had to depend on other communities because we weren't allowed to read, write, own property, gain wealth. So who was going to help establish our schools? Who was going to teach? We have always been models of diversity. That doesn't change. So we're proud of who we are. But when your students are poor, when they come from disaffected communities, then you fight the fights that those students need you to fight, right? And that's what we have done. That's what we think higher ed should do. So here's the thing. When your students come from poverty, you can fight the edges of poverty, right? Which is what we started out doing. We turned our football field into a farm because we were in a food desert. And we thought students should have access, communities should have access to food. And, you know, by the way, people always get really fired up about that. And they're like, oh, it was so brave of you to cut football. We lost every game, right? Like, our football team wasn't on national TV. We weren't producing any any NFL draft picks. In fact, the really horrible part about this is our largest customer, the Dallas Cowboys. So the reality of it is we have put more kale in the NFL than we ever put players. All right? And that says something. But we fought that fight. We also then turned around and had to deal with an environmental justice issue. Because in case you don't know this, when you are in under-resourced communities, that's where people put all the bad stuff. So 2 miles from our community that the college resides in is the city garbage dump. Okay? The city garbage dump. We were closer to the garbage dump than we were a grocery store. That's not your experience at Harvard. It's not your experience at Yale. It's not your experience at George Washington. I've been to Georgetown a lot. Not your experience at Georgetown. In fact, I can't figure out where the garbage dump is in D.C., okay? So my point is, you fight the fights that the people that you represent need fought. And increasingly, the fight that needs to be fought in America today is poverty. And you can play around the edges of poverty, or you can strike at its heart. And I've heard lots of people tell me, oh, you shouldn't talk about trying to end poverty. You can't end poverty. You're going to look silly. You're going to look stupid. Listen, here's to the crazy ones. Right? Here's the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world. Because if you don't think you can, you never will. And we believe that the model we've created will give us a chance at doing that. And more importantly, if we fail, so what? At least we tried. And that's more important. So here's our solution. We believe in something called reality-based education. Here's the first step of it. Urban work colleges. So we created our own model of higher education. We looked around and thought, if 79% of employers want students to come with real-world work experience, if 50% of students want real-world work experience, why don't we create a model that accomplishes that, right? So for us, if you come to Paul Quinn College and you live on campus, you work. You get a job. And here's something else you should know. Everybody's working anyway. Over 75% of today's college students work more than 24 hours per week. But they're working in jobs that don't help establish them in their careers. And they're working job hours which put them at academic peril. I'm always fascinated when I go places and I hear faculty talk about, oh, the students are lazy, they're not working hard enough. The students are tired, right? Because they're working all the time. Like, and you have to understand that. So maybe instead of criticizing them, you develop systems that allow them to have it a little bit easier so they can do the work. That's what this does. We have taken the need for students to go out and find their own jobs in-house. We find the jobs for our students, right? Every student works somewhere between 10 and 16 hours per week, right? Because of that, and they work on campus and they work off campus. And because of that, we were able to cut tuition and fees by $10,000. Okay, so next year it'll cost less than $16,000 to go to Paul Quinn College, right? And you will come and you will get a job. And we've created the option for students to be able to graduate with about $10,000 of debt. Now, let me be very clear. Many of our students are borrowing more than that, okay? Because it's the first time they've had access to what passes as capital markets. Because if you're coming from a Pell Grant background, that means you're coming from a low-income community, most likely. If you're coming from a low-income community, your banking industry are payday lending places, okay? Like, it's a different life. So one of the things that we realize is that by reducing tuition and fees, you also reduce the amount of money students can borrow because there's a cap on that, all right? So we're either going to help you not borrow as much through counseling you, or we're going to put a cap on it so you don't look up and you're $50,000 in debt when you graduate because you've never had access to money and your family needed the money. All right? So we're very pleased at that. And here's what that's done. In 4 years' time, we've reduced the average debt from $39,000 down to $16,000. All right? Now, we're not happy with 16. We're trying to drive it down to 10 or less. But when you start at 39, that's a significant accomplishment. Part of the reason it was so high is because our students were taking longer to graduate because they had to work, and that extended the amount of time that they were in school. These are just solving real-world issues, all right? Here's the other thing. Strata and Gallup did a study that talked about how important it is to have internships. So with our system, students have internships for every year that they're there. So you will graduate. If you're there for 2 years, you have 2 years of internship experience. 4 years, you have 4 years of internship experience.